Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Inclusive by Design, Building Workplaces for All Abilities. This conversation is especially meaningful as we stand on the cusp of National Disability Employment Awareness Month, or as we like to put it, NDEAM, our Super Bowl, which we officially recognize every October. While NDEAM highlights the immense value and talent that professionals with disabilities bring to the workforce, today's discussion is about operationalizing that awareness and building truly accessible, empowering workplaces. We're moving beyond a month of recognition to explore how to make inclusion a foundational element, a design principle in your organization. We are honored to welcome an amazing group of panelists with lived experiences and professional expertise in accessibility and disability inclusion. They'll share powerful stories and practical strategies for fostering inclusive environments that not only welcome employees with disabilities, but also actively remove barriers and elevate their voices. My name is Brittany. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I have the pleasure of being the Learning and Development Specialist at Career Circle, where skills go to work. I have on a white t-shirt. I have on clear wide brimmed glasses with brown eyes, and I'm wearing a smile. That is part of my uniform. I'm so excited to be here today. We are currently recording this webinar to ensure accessibility for all participants. If you'd like to enable closed captioning, click more in the bottom right corner of your screen, then select captions and show captions. Whether you're a job seeker looking for inspiration and tools to navigate the workplace, or an employer, talent acquisition specialist, or HR leader eager to build more inclusive and accessible systems, today's conversation is for you. You'll leave with firsthand insights and concrete actions to create a culture where disability inclusion is not a box to check, but a core value. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our fantastic group of panelists. Could you each please provide a descriptive introduction and share a bit about yourselves? Brittany, why don't you start us off?
Thank you, Brittany. My name is Brittany Martin-Dejean. Hi, everybody. I'm really glad to be here today. I'm founder of Inclusion Jumpstart. I am sitting on a pretty bland background of a cream wall, wearing a black t-shirt, and I have about shoulder length curly brown hair. I am very happy to be here today. And Inclusion Jumpstart, our mission is very simple, is to get more people comfortable with disability. I have found that in my career working as a nonprofit leader and in corporate spaces that people's discomfort, awkwardness, and avoidance of disability is the barrier to inclusion that we don't talk about enough. So I like to bring empathy and understanding and help people transform their perspectives on disability.
Thank you so much. Brittany spelled the same way as mine. Then we're going to have Russell. Russell, introduce yourself.
Thanks, Brittany. Hi, everyone. I am Russell Schaefer. I am the Executive Vice President of Strategy and Programs at Disability In. I'm also really grateful to be a part of this session today. As Brittany so aptly stated, National Disability Employment Awareness Month is our Super Bowl in the disability community. And as a Cleveland Browns fan, this is about the only time I get to celebrate the Super Bowl. But in addition to that bit of my identity, I am also a Caucasian man in my 40s. I keep my head closely shaved. I am wearing a dark Disability In zip-up windbreaker, and I'm coming to you from my home office in Northwest Arkansas today. I myself am a person with a disability. I was diagnosed with a genetic degenerative eye condition when I was a child about 10 years old, which led to my progressive vision loss and eventual blindness in my late 20s, early 30s. As the Executive Vice President of Strategy and Programs at Disability In, we are a US-based, globally focused nonprofit that works with corporate partners. We have more than 550, including some I know are represented here on this call today, to help drive disability inclusion through the workplace, the marketplace, and the supply chain. I have the good fortune of leading our teams that drive our Disability Index annual benchmarking survey, supplier inclusion certification. We are the leading global certifier of disability-owned business enterprises, or DOBIes as we call them, as well as our Next Gen Leaders program, which is a 6-month virtual mentoring program for college students and recent graduates with disabilities that match them with mentors in the private sector for job readiness and to find that first job. And then lead our learning and workforce development programming as well. All of our training, webinars, and all of the content at our annual Disability In Global Conference and Expo, which some of you may have attended. It's really great to be a part of the program today. And Brittany, thanks again for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And let me just say, you have some fans in the audience. We have some Cleveland Browns fans, okay? People that wanted to make sure you were not on that limb by yourself being a fan.
Commiserate together.
Absolutely, absolutely. Mindy, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Mindy Henderson, Vice President of Disability Outreach and Empowerment with the Muscular Dystrophy Association. I'm a white woman wearing a black shirt and light brown curly hair. The Muscular Dystrophy Association serves individuals living with more than 300 different neuromuscular conditions, including muscular dystrophy, of course, ALS, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and many, many others. I myself live with a condition called spinal muscular atrophy, which is a neuromuscular condition, and have lived my life from a wheelchair. And I am thrilled to be here among these incredible panelists talking about something that is near and dear to my heart.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mindy, for being here. And last but certainly not least, is there a doctor in the house? Doctor, introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm so happy to be here. Happy Thursday, Friday Eve, and I am excited to be here for this discussion. I am Dr. Zakia Mabry. I like to just go by Zakia or Dr. Z. And I want to say good morning, good afternoon to wherever you're tuning in from, either live or watching on replay. I'm the founder of the Ani Project, which is a management consulting firm where we focus on leadership development, culture, and psychological safety. In addition to that, we have a new vertical called Above Zone Capital, where we help entrepreneurs and small business owners have access to funding they need when traditional banks say no. My background spans about, I'm going to say 20 years, coupled with federal government experience, private sector, and leading strategy inclusion efforts. And today, in that same lens, we like to help organizations of all sizes build workplaces and communities where people have used their abilities or lived experiences to lead boldly without an apology. How many people in the chat like to live and be your authentic self without labels, barriers? I am that person, and that is the reason why I founded the Ani Project. My apologies up front if my speech seems a little altered. I have these metal braces on my teeth, and I'm still learning how to speak correctly in them, but I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the entire panel for donating of your time and being as amazing as you are. We're going to jump right into it, starting with you, Russell. First question is, let's introduce our audience to the basics. Can you clearly explain the difference between self-identification and self-disclosure? And why is knowing this difference key to building trust in the workplace?
Thanks, Brittany. Yeah, this is a really great place to start when we're talking about Disability Employment Awareness Month. You know, the terms self-identification and self-disclosure sometimes get used interchangeably. They are not synonymous. So when we think about self-identification, it's important to remember that it's transactional, whereas self-disclosure is conversational. And what I mean by that is self-identification, it is voluntary, it's confidential, it's systematic, and it's aggregate. So an individual with a disability should always be voluntarily self-identifying. You should never feel like you're pressured or forced, and employers, you should never pressure or force an individual to self-identify. It is a choice. It's confidential. The data is going into an HR data warehouse, like a Workday or some other HR information system, where it is confidential. It should not be shared with your supervisor or your manager or anyone else. That brings me to the aggregate. It should only be viewed in the aggregate by a very select group of individuals, those who work in HR analytics, maybe in diversity, equity, and inclusion, for the purpose of understanding workforce representations at a macro aggregate level. You should not be able to individually identify someone from their self-identification in a system. And then that brings me to the last piece. It's systematic. So you as an employee should have the autonomy and the ability to go into a system, be it like a system like a Workday or an HR information system, and quote unquote check the box that you identify as a person with a disability, or identify with a whole host of other demographics. But for the sake of our conversation today, we're talking about disability. In some rare instances, self-identification might be done via a paper form that is inputted by somebody after the fact, but most of the time these days it is systematic on an HR information system. And again, it is at the employee's discretion and autonomy to do so. Whereas a self-disclosure is a dialogue, a discussion, a conversation, either one-to-one or one-to-many. So think about in my introduction when I said I identify as a person with a disability, I am legally blind. That is self-disclosure. I told you something about myself in a dialogue or in a monologue. A self-disclosure conversation is really important for a few key reasons. It is how you request a reasonable accommodations for the recruitment process or post-hire in employment to be able to receive what you need to be able to perform your job or to be able to fully partake in the benefits of your employment. Self-identification is not a mechanism for requesting a reasonable accommodation. It must be a self-disclosure conversation between the employee and an HR business partner, their supervisor, or someone else who is designated as that point of contact for the accommodations request. A self-disclosure can also be how you create trust, to your question, Brittany, amongst your supervisor and your peers. When you think about 3/4 of all disabilities are non-apparent, many of us with disabilities are not showing up in the workplace with a disability that's readily apparent to the people who we work with. That doesn't mean that that disability isn't there, obviously. It just means that the people around us might not know. Just self-disclosure is how they come from not knowing to knowing. But as Zakia talked about psychological safety, that is a key ingredient to self-disclosure. You need to feel as though you are comfortable and safe to share that part of your identity, particularly when it's not apparent, and who you share it with. And it's often done to lessen the cost of covering. There's a cognitive load and emotional tax that we pay when we keep our disability identity concealed from others that we can shed in order to be more productive when we are able to disclose. But it can also be part of a broader storytelling campaign. When we step forward and disclose our disability identity with courage and confidence, we create spaces where others can feel comfortable to do the same in their own ways. So it's really important for employers to not conflate the two terms, self-identification and self-disclosure, when communicating to their employees with disabilities. It's also important for us as people with disabilities to understand the distinction between the two and when both are appropriate. And again, recognizing that each is a personal choice that we should come to on our own, carefully considering all of the specific circumstances of our situation.
Mic drop. Mic drop. Absolutely 100%. Dr. Z, the next question is for you. And I saw you unmuting yourself. Did you want to add?
Yes,
to
I just wanted to add to that. But
Okay,
yes, mic drop, hot hearts, and all the claps, because Russell,
Yes.
that was very thorough. And I loved at the end how he went back and looped to reiterate what he said previous. I want to just reiterate that For the person who has a disability, I want to say in plain English so you can be very clear, because I have a lot of people coming to me, even now when I'm still not, I no longer work for the federal government. People inbox me all the time with questions that just because you disclose you have a disability, that is not a reasonable accommodation request. So I just want to highlight that for you. And also for the managers, whether you're in the federal or public sector, small business, uh, you have to be able to be attuned to your employees and pick up on what they may need, and maybe have education and awareness for some of those things for your employees. We're going to look at the intersectional lens. So those are the two things. And the third thing, and then I'm going to mute up, is that when we're having these conversations, we're always saying in the workplace, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in the workplace. It's wherever you show up. I'm very active in my community. So sorority, fraternities, I'm talking about churches, professional organizations. If you're a leader in that, this conversation is for you as well. You also need to be ensured that you have a healthy organizational culture where people feel comfortable enough to disclose, because they might be something that you might need to tweak so someone can feel like they truly belong in your culture. So that's the last thing I wanted to say. This is not just for work.
Come through. And I know my background won't let you see my snaps, but absolutely. Okay. I love it. And you might as well keep your microphone unmuted because of the fact that the next question is for you. How can organizations intentionally design environments that support employees with both visible and non-visible disabilities?
That question is very simple.
Oh, I need for you to unmute yourself for me.
I'm sorry. I start off saying that answer is very simple. How? By having people who have apparent and non-apparent disabilities a part of your planning, whether it's planning how you're going to design the workspace, planning for how you're going to have a conference, any of those different things, have them be part of the conversation, not just on the side table. When you're looking at this, we want to make sure that's from the lens of someone who's worked across different landscapes, whether it's federal, public sector, small business, because inclusion looks very different in each area. But the intention has to be the same. For example, when we're talking about in the federal government, that was something else I forgot to mention. If I have found it to be successful when you have a campaign, when you resurvey the workforce to see who has acquired a disability. Well, oftentimes, many of us on the panel, when we're having conversations about organizational culture, diversity, one thing we probably all say, disability is the category any one of us can fall into at any given time. It could be after this live, you could be driving, you can go to the doctor next week and have a diagnosis. So anyone could have a disability. So that's why you want to resurvey your workforce is a good practice to see who has acquired a disability, and make that form that Russell was talking about available, because some people may not know where to find it within your database or your intranet. So those are different ways. And so it's with true intention and having conversations. And then if you don't know something, ask, bring an expert into the conversation, whether you're leading a large agency or a 10-person business. The foundation is the same: psychological safety. Psychological safety. When people trust that they can bring their full selves to work or into your environment, they feel seen. I know this personally as a person with multiple disabilities. We can perform better. Inclusion isn't just about a compliance or a task or a checklist to say, okay, we need this so that we can get funding for our grants or for EEOC if you're a federal employer. It's a design principle. You have to think of it as a mindset. It's how we move from awareness to actual equity.
Absolutely. And Mindy, I see that you unmuted yourself. Did you want to add something to that question?
Actually, I think it was very well said. I forgot to mute myself, because I was so enthralled with what's been said so far.
Well, absolutely. Y'all, listen, I get so excited, and I know that we only have one person assigned to each question. So if you unmute yourself, that is my cue for me to say, come on and jump on into this goodness, okay? And so with that, the next question is for you, Brittany. What are some common misconceptions about disability in the workplace, and how can we shift those narratives?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I spend a lot of time looking at misconceptions that people have internalized as truth. And sometimes these misconceptions, before I get into them, it's sometimes disability misconceptions are so often go unchallenged that they are believed to be true, that people don't even necessarily realize that what they're accepting is not actually how we interact, and based on cultural norms. Like, we have this special set of rules that aren't necessarily applicable and aren't based in reality. So two that stick out to me a lot that I see come up time and time again in hiring cultures or corporate cultures is an assumption of inability, an assumption of low quality of life. And they show up in different ways. People can believe both. But when we look at first inability, when I've worked with different recruiting teams or talked to people who have good intentions, they're still making a lot of biased assumptions about people with disclosed or apparent disabilities are able to do or not able to do. And if you think about it, when we interview candidates of any background, we mostly have come to understand, or at least feel cringy at the idea of assuming what someone can do based on what you know about them or what they look like. If a woman sat down at a table and a hiring person said, oh, well, you know, they're a woman, so they can't do this. Like, I'm sure it still happens, but there is a more of a collective reaction that is not how HR hiring is done. However, when it comes to disability, I feel like that assumption goes too often unchecked. And people tend to think, well, they're in a wheelchair, they can't do that, or they've disclosed autism or ADHD, they can't do that. And that's something that will then carry through in that person's hiring process and remove the ability for them to have a fair chance at a job. And this can also either be collected with and or separate from an assumption that disability can sometimes be seen as synonymous with misery. My dad is a quadriplegic, and so I've watched this happen where, you know, people see that, it's like, oh, poor him, or so sad, or even to me, like, poor you for having a disabled dad, and things that it's like that comes with that assumption of misery and low quality of life, that when someone with a disability then shows up at an interview, if the person carries that bias of sadness, how likely do you think, and in the audience, I would love anyone who's in that hiring position to reflect for a minute. Have you ever thought about someone, or has someone disclosed anything or anything been apparent where you had a reaction of sympathy or a reaction of pity? Because if you do, then that is not going to make it's going to become more difficult to have an equitable hiring process. Because are you really likely to hire someone that you intrinsically feel bad for? And so these are kind of the assumptions that, again, unchecked, because a lot of these are narratives about disability that have been played out for generations, that need to really be reprogrammed. And so when it comes to inability, it's about understanding that we do not know what someone is capable of by looking at them, by their identity, by what they've disclosed. And that does not change if one of the elements of that person's identity or lived experience is considered a disability. And when it comes to misery, I like to ask people, depending on, you know, since when does standing on 2 feet or seeing with your eyes or being able to hear or being neurotypical mean that you're happy? Right? We don't actually also know anything about someone's quality of life or what they may deal with. Someone may deal with something that has nothing to do with their disability, but when the disability is in the picture, it tends to skew the conversation, and that person becomes a disabled person rather than being a person who is able to have all these intersecting identities, who gets to be assessed and for a job in the same way as anyone else would. And so those are two that I really like to get people thinking. Like, if you've ever had a knee-jerk reaction of sympathy, if you've ever caught yourself making assumptions about someone's abilities, you have to start catching yourself and remind yourself that you actually don't know. And removing that stress of trying to figure it out yourself will lead people to be able to engage more like human beings in a hiring process, and direct people to remember, you know, those HR skills of what it actually means to assess someone's job skills and experience, or whatever, you know, you need to do to figure out whether someone's right for the role.
Let me just say, Brittany, you are resonating in the chat.
Oh, I
Okay.
wasn't even looking.
Oh, listen, you got some love from the chat. My beautiful colleague, Shannon, shout out to you, was just talking about how that resonated so greatly with her. So spot on, spot on.
Brittany, it's
Mindy,
Russell. Could I tag in on that?
yes, tag right on in. Tag
Yeah,
right in.
I think what Brittany shared there around, you know, the inability and the misery piece, it really resonates. And I think that there's often this subtlety to the tyranny of low expectations that often plagues those of us with disabilities. And the inability piece reminds me of an encounter that I had when I worked in the private sector, worked in an office. I was using the restroom, as we do, and you know, as I was, you know, getting ready to exit the restroom, a gentleman held the door open for me. Okay, nothing to see here. That's just human kindness. That's good. But as I exited the restroom, he said to me, "Good job, buddy." And I was so taken aback that I didn't say anything. I just smiled and I went about my businesses. But as I got back to my desk and I reflected on it, I was like, you know, what I should have said was, do you congratulate everyone who successfully exits the restroom, or just those of us for whom you believe it to be an accomplishment worthy of praise? And then as I thought about it more, I'm like, if this guy thinks that I need to be congratulated for exiting the restroom, what must he think about my ability to perform my job? And what might my prospects be if he were to be part of the decision maker group for my next promotion or my next assignment or calibration, or if my name shows up or stays off of a list of people who are up for reduction in force? And so it's those types of attitudes. They're subtle, but we as people with disabilities, we encounter one of those like 10 times, 20 times a day, 7 days a week, 365, and they add up and they stack up. And so it's that type of attitude. It's seldom blatant, it's seldom egregious, but it's there just below the surface. And it's one of the primary things that continues to hold us back.
What you're
I would
talking
love,
about? Oh, go ahead, Mindy.
I'm sorry, I would love to add to that also from a slightly different perspective. And I know that we're gonna talk through a lot more aspects of this topic, and we'll touch on this in more detail, but I once had a manager years ago who commented. Incidentally, in 20 years working in high tech before my current my current career, I was the only person in a wheelchair I ever saw. I worked for 3 different companies, thousands and thousands of employees, and at one of those companies, my manager commented to me how important my presence at the company was to the culture of that company. And, you know, what I'm sure he felt like was a compliment, it really struck me as, you know, I don't want that job. I don't want that responsibility. And that's a lot to place on a single individual to sort of prove, for lack of a better term, that you're an inclusive company. And I wanted to add that to some of the other comments that are being said, because I think it's in keeping with the authenticity that really needs to be present in creating inclusive cultures.
Can I
100%. Go ahead, Brittany.
just gonna add one thing too, because I think, thank you both for sharing, because these are the kinds of stories that I hear these all the time from friends, colleagues with disabilities, and I've also heard the reverse, because I've felt that because being non-disabled with a disabled dad and working in disability, I get a lot of the comments from the other side, the people who end up making the awkward comments, who admit like, well, I had someone tell me once, I had a boss in a wheelchair once and I didn't know what to do, so I avoided him. Right. So they may not have ever blatantly said anything to that manager, but to Russell's point, the blatant comment like that to Russell and what he illustrated for all of us, it speaks volumes, because that is one blatant comment that is not, you know, to his point of how that's going to affect the trickle down. Like, so much of it also does go unsaid. And so it's really important that people with disabilities are aware these things happen, right? And the tyranny of low expectations, Russell, that you mentioned too. I wanted to call that out, because it's another point where we've gotten to a point that culturally we understand that you don't hiring, I'll use women again, but hiring women doesn't mean lowering the bar. Does it still happen? Do people still believe that? Yes, but there's more of this collective knowledge, and I don't think we're there yet with disability, but it's the same. You're hiring for a job. You're not, giving them a popsicle or a sticker, right? And that's how sometimes I feel like these infantilization type comments, the assumptions of sympathy, those kinds of things, they're so deeply rooted. It doesn't make these people, I really believe that empathy is the solution. I don't think that they are bad people. I believe that most horrible things people say and do come from a good place. So I like that, in that we can work with good intentions, we can make change. But if anyone feels themselves or sees themselves or questions whether they've made comments like Mindy or Russell have shared, or to anyone else, it is time to really transform your perspective and kick in your learning. Get help about it, because these are the things that really poison cultures, erode psychological safety, lead to bias hiring, and can just cause a lot of trickle-down problems that don't seem like that on the surface when you're trying to pat someone on the back and you just don't know any better.
Absolutely. I love what you all have just stated, and I wanted to give some insight to those who are allies that are on the call. I think that it might be important, if by chance you are having a moment of questioning or self-reflection about maybe you having good intentions and it not necessarily coming off the way that you might have hoped. I would suggest that you look into ableist language as well as microaggressions. When you listen to the different experiences that we've heard thus far. I've heard a micro insult. I've heard a micro invalidation. I've heard a micro assault that has occurred. And so just being knowledgeable about what this looks like for this specific identity can absolutely be so beneficial and help you in your allyship journey. All right. With that being said, Mindy, I want to call you up to the front of the class. It's your turn now. Your question is, if accessibility ensures people can get through the door, what does disability inclusion ensure happens once they are inside? What are some examples of inclusive practices in terms of leadership, training, or peer support that are critical for retention?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I really love this question. And I think that the way that I kind of like to think about this in terms of accessibility versus inclusion is that accessibility gets us physically in the door. Inclusion makes sure that we stay, that we feel safe, that we stay, and that we thrive once we're inside. Accessibility is about removing physical or procedural even barriers. Inclusion, on the other hand, is really about creating belonging, which I think has been said already this morning, but where people with disabilities really feel, and anyone for that matter, feels seen, safe to be themselves, which is something that I've struggled with in the past when I was that only person in a wheelchair who I ever saw at companies of 20,000 people, having to almost hide what I thought would be perceived as vulnerabilities, if I showed up in the wrong way, aka showing up authentically. And so I think it's important that people feel included and feel that sense of belonging so that they can show up as themselves, so that they can contribute to their fullest potential. And inclusive practices that really drive retention, I think often really start with leadership. when leaders model inclusive behavior by listening, by asking questions, making space for diverse perspectives, it really signals that inclusion isn't an afterthought. It's part of your daily existence at this organization. Training, I think, is also key, and I've seen some comments in the chat about people who are involved in hiring processes and having to train people to do things like eliminate biases. We've all got them. I think that that's important to say out loud because it's not bad that we have biases, and it's part of, I think, the human existence to have biases wherever they come from. I think what's important is that you try to recognize them and negate them. And so I do think that disability inclusion training can help managers who lead people to know how to talk about accommodations and things, how to focus on strengths rather than assumptions, like we've also heard. And then I think the last thing that actually not the last thing I would say, I'm also going to throw out here. There was a conversation a little while ago. I think Dr. Z meant, articulated beautifully the differences between and Russell, self-disclosure and identification, and that was something that I really struggled with in the hiring process. And I hear this all the time from other, specifically wheelchair users, because it's a very apparent disability and you can't show up at an interview and choose to let that be something that isn't disclosed. And so um, about 6 years ago, I was in the middle of a job search, and I think it's important for the employers on this call to hear how we struggle with knowing ahead of time before I show up at the office for that interview. Do I disclose my disability or do I not disclose my disability? And it can be such a personal battle. And it's something that people spend so much unnecessary energy on when, frankly, they should be prepping for their interview and how to show up in the best way and really illustrate what their skills and strengths are. And instead, I'm worrying about, do I tell them I'm in a wheelchair or do I not tell them I'm in a wheelchair? And so I think that as employers, anything that you can do to make it known that you have an inclusive culture and that it's okay if you need an accommodation during the interview process, and make people feel safe to share that information with you. That's something that wasn't done for me real often, and I would have really valued it if a company had approached their hiring process that way. And then the other thing that I'll throw out there in terms of other examples of inclusive practices are, things like peer networks and employee resource groups, or ERGs, can be game changers for a company in terms from a lot of different perspectives. But they provide mentorship, advocacy, and community. They can be invaluable resources to your company or organization, and they help employees know that they're not alone, and that they do belong. So I'll leave it at that.
Another mic drop moment. When I tell you, you was giving us some golden nuggets. Oh my lamb. Okay. I had to stop myself from interrupting. Oh, when you said we need training, mic drop. Okay. What? We all have biases. Mic drop. My gosh. Okay, let me come back. Let me come back. Brittany, the next question is for you, unless someone wanted to add to Mindy's mic drop moment. Going once, going twice. All right, the next question is, when we discuss universal design, which is a core theme of this webinar, are we talking about accessibility or accommodation? And could you provide a tangible example of a workspace change that moves beyond a single individual accommodation and achieves broad accessibility for everyone?
Yeah, sure. And I think a lot of what Mindy, what you were saying resonates and kind of ties to this as well. But I think just to get it out there, kind of one of those like terms you need to know and be clear on is what an accommodation is. I used to work at Airbnb, and sometimes people internally thought because it was an accommodation company, they got confused at what an actual accommodation was. So it's important, I think, for people when you're in those, in the space of HR, to first understand that an accommodation is not your job to decide. It is the employee with a disability decision to come forward and request, and then it is your job to meet it. But that is not, you never want to be in a situation where you're saying, I think this person needs this accommodation and I'm going to do it. Right. That's not how this works. So, but we as companies have legal obligations to provide reasonable accommodations for employees with disabilities and candidates with disabilities. And so, but as has been discussed by Russell and Mindy, also like that comes from the employee themselves. They know what they need. They are the ones who need to be driving that. And it is your job to listen and accommodate. But when it comes to universal design, being accessible and inclusive, it isn't just about waiting for those people to come forward. Because again, as has been discussed at this point, a lot of people are expending a lot of energy deciding whether or not they even can disclose and be treated equitably or safely. And so there is absolutely responsibility on the part of the company to think ahead and to think, what can we proactively do to center inclusion and accessibility? And as we said, accessibility can be, the ramp to get in for wheelchair users. It can be inclusive document formats. Like there's a lot of different things that come to accessibility. But I also think of accessibility of access to participate, access to be included. And in that way, it can be very similar to the things that Mindy was saying. But one thing that I'd love to do, and this kind of speaks to a way you can get ahead of your candidates wasting unnecessary energy on just whether or not they should disclose, is whether you're starting a hiring process or even holding an event. I have always recommended people to include language that says, what do you need to fully participate in this experience? Whether that's the interview, and it should go to everyone. Because as to Russell's earlier point, most disabilities are not apparent, right? And you can imagine at this point, all the candidates who are weighing this discussion, like, should I, shouldn't I, is this safe? Will I be judged? Some don't have a choice. Others might, some mask. Like there's all kinds of gymnastics people are having to figure out. And so if you put that foot forward, if you say, even so far as like, and reasonable accommodations are available upon request, that proactive language on your career page, on your job descriptions, on your, in your any candidate emails that end up going out, putting that proactive foot forward to every single person, not only signals to people, like people who don't need it, but it will send a massive signal of psychological safety and inclusion to those people who know they need it and have been debating that in their head. The other thing I'll say is that I've heard people tell me like, well, we don't need to do this because we don't have disabled employees. And I'm like, well, this is a kind of really bad chicken or the egg situation, because if you have more than a few employees, you likely do have someone with a disability, but the chances are high that that can be non-apparent. And so if you are catch yourself waiting for someone to disclose, yet you're doing nothing to proactively promote or educate about disability, it's going to be this self-fulfilling prophecy that will lead to, again, eroded psychological safety, lost talent, lost opportunities, discrimination, like all of it. So in my mind, if you are working in your company, if you're in a leadership position or making decisions about education and investment for your company, you already have non-disabled people in your ranks who have what I call FOMO, which is called the fear of messing up. And people who have been locked in these cycles of misconceptions and avoidance that lead to really bad downstream outcomes, like I mentioned before. And so You don't need to wait for someone to be brave enough to disclose in an environment like that before you make that kind of investment. And so my other recommendation is disability is everywhere. It's not always apparent. And anything you can do to help your employees, help your non-disabled employees or people who are not familiar to feel more confident, to get over that FOMO by helping them understand those misconceptions, what goes wrong, and so that they can show up and not be carrying a weight on their shoulders of that fear that makes people feel more comfortable avoidance, because avoidance isn't a strategy.
Absolutely, 100%. And let me just say this, statistically speaking, you are 100% accurate. My last research told me that when it comes down to individuals or professionals with disabilities, we're looking at 1 in 5, between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4. And so truly, waiting until the last minute, avoiding and not being proactive is absolutely doing yourself a disservice. Y'all, we only have 15 minutes left. Does it feel like it's been 45 minutes? No, that's what happens when you're having a good time. All right, with that being said, we have 3 more questions that we need to get through, and I'm excited for your responses. Russell, you are up. What role can disability-focused ERGs play in fostering inclusion and driving organizational change? And how can HR and leadership best support and partner with them?
I love this question because I literally wouldn't be here if it weren't for ERG. I joined a disability ERG almost 20 years ago, just to stabilize myself and find support as I was going through my vision loss. To make a long story short, I ended up finding myself chairing that resource group on 2 separate occasions, and later on in my private sector career, being responsible for all of employee resource group strategy. And today at Disability In, I get to support many disability ERGs with their programming. But I think when we think about ERGs, I think we need to reframe those letters. Employee resource group. The ERG to me often is they are your expert return generators. And in particular, when it comes to employment practices, they can be your advisors and your ambassadors, but they're your expert return generators when it comes to trying to understand a target market or trying to understand a particular demographic for recruitment or for employee retention. They've got that expertise that you can tap into. But from a recruitment perspective, if you're looking to try to bring in more of this to your organization, you need to fish where the fish are. Well, how do you find out where the fish are? Ask the fish that you know. And so, as people with disabilities, we know the community groups, clubs, colleges, social media groups where other people with disabilities are at. We can advise recruitment and HR on where to go. What conferences to attend, what colleges have really good disability student services groups, places on social media where we should be advertising, all of the things. We are tapped in and plugged in to our community and can be your conduit to that community. That's the advisor piece. But the ambassador piece is, and Mindy talked about this before, trust is so important and cultural competence is key. It's one thing to go to a disability focused conference with a recruiter who has job requisitions, but if that recruiter has no disability experience or cultural competence, then, you have to remember that a job hire and acquisition is a two-way street. A potential candidate is interviewing a potential employer just as much as the employer is interviewing the candidate. And if they look at you and say, I don't know if you get me or get my experience, they're not going to necessarily want to work with you. They're not sure if it's going to be psychologically safe. Or if they're going to be accommodated, all the things that we've talked about here before. But if you put that recruiter at that conference alongside somebody from your disability ERG who can speak to the experience of people with disabilities inside of the company with clarity, with precision, with passion, and underscore, my company, it's a great place for people with disabilities to work. Let me tell you why. You're going to go so much further in your attraction of candidates with disabilities than if you just send a recruiter alone. And ultimately, that's what you're trying to get at. In one of my past employers, we ended up hiring somebody who was a caregiver to a child with significant disabilities. And they told us what sealed the deal was they had been shared a newsletter from our employee resource group that told the story of a parent with a very similar situation. They're like, wow, if that person feels like not only are they supported at work, but they can talk openly about their caregiver situation, that's the kind of company I feel I want to work for and where I can thrive. So leverage your ERGs as your advisors on where to go recruit, and as your ambassadors to show up and show out to the best of your ability when you do go out to recruit.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this last question is for the entirety of the panel. The question is, what's one action HR, TA, or people leaders can take tomorrow to move the needle on disability inclusion in their workplace? Now, I'm going to start with you, Mindy, and we'll just go around. Y'all do the popcorn thing.
Sounds good. Thank you. I think an interesting question to ask yourself if you are an employer is who might we be unintentionally excluding? I think that question opens the door to progress. It might lead you to review your recruiting materials for accessibility, your website, your return to office policies, or it might invite feedback from employees about what's working and what's not. And then taking action, even small changes, something like adding closed captions to an all hands meeting, or making sure that your employee systems are accessible, really send a powerful message of respect and belonging. Inclusion doesn't, it's a little cheesy, but it doesn't start with perfection. It starts with commitment and by taking one step at a time.
I love that. I agree. It takes one little micro step. The small as a mustard seed to start moving the needle on inclusion. And I also agree the question should be asked. Last time I looked, it was over 100 people on this line. And if you're in management, in or leadership in your organization, who might we be excluding? That's the question you should be asking yourself. Who might we be excluding? Really, when you get off this live, you can actually jot that down from the information we shared today. I want you to look at your systems, your processes, how you send information out to have your meetings, your job postings, and even your technology. I just want to share this small story. An organization that I am a part of, I asked for a accommodation. I didn't use those phrases, but I said, when you send emails to this email, I have a lot of things that come through this. Can we use GroupMe like other organizations? In this particular, it's not work, it's another organization. And the person who's the leader said, no, that's not my preference. So she put her preference over what I was asking. And I did already disclose with her my multiple disabilities. This is really going to blow your mind. She's a medical doctor. So when I share this story, it's not to have pity on me, but show that some people can't get past their blinders or their personal reasons for doing things and how it can impact the other person. So what ended up happening is I wasn't able to participate in some things that they wanted me to because I didn't get the information. We can look down to the granular level is simply sending an email versus putting it in some type of chat. That's what I would love for you to look on. And the impact also is how it makes the person feel. Do I feel like I can go to that leader about something else, something bigger? Absolutely not. So how are we unintentionally excluding people, but also how are we intentionally excluding people is also the question. Because sometimes once you've been put on notice, I believe it's our duty as leaders is to take action, right? We're supposed to take action. And if you don't know what action to take for certain disabilities, I saw someone drop it in the chat. Jan, the Jan Accommodation Network. Oh my goodness, it's a great resource. You can either type in there what type of disability someone has, what possible accommodations they may need. You can even hop on the phone with them. You can even set up to have them, a consultant, come to you. So jan.org is a wonderful organization. Again, not just for work, but from other environments in which we are dealing with people. This is all about how we navigate people with disabilities so that we can feel like we're an integral part of the environment and that we're being accepted. So again, it's not just about compliance. And that's really what I wanted to drive home is we got to take a look in the mirror, take a look at self and see what those micro steps are that we can do. Thank you.
Absolutely. Brittany or Russell, your thoughts?
I'll just leave you with, when it comes to accommodations, don't believe the hype that they are too expensive. The truth is the average accommodation costs $300. Most cost absolutely nothing from a monetary perspective. If you are a large employer with a couple of commas in your annual revenue, if it reaches the EEOC on an undue hardship based on cost alone, they're not going to side with you. Large scale employers' cost is not a reason to deny a reasonable accommodation, because the truth is they just don't cost that much, particularly in relationship to a company's annual operating budget. So if they are massively disruptive to process, that's another story. But A, they don't cost that much, and B, that is not a very strong defense.
Thank you so much, Russell. And Brittany, if you could give me a quick last sentence or so. What are your last thoughts?
Real quick, I don't think we change systems until we change people. So if, again, you see yourself in any of these things, it is time to diversify your feed. It is time to learn. It is time to talk to people. It is time to expand your awareness, be open to that, what you think that may be true, may be wrong, and open your mind to a different reality of what you think you knew about disability.
I love it. Absolutely love it. Y'all, I'm going to do something that I have not done. I want you to flood these individuals' timeline on their LinkedIn and tell them how amazing that they are. They have dedicated themselves for this time and this space to be able to provide this insight and this wisdom to you all. Make sure that you're connecting with all of us. And make sure that you're letting them know how the things that they have said have resonated with you. Okay. I thank you all so much for joining us for Inclusive by Design, Building Workplaces for All Abilities. A huge thank you, as I've already said, to my amazing panelists for your honesty, for your insight, and for your passion. You've given us so much to work through and act upon. We hope today's conversation has provided you with the practical strategies needed to go beyond compliance and start viewing inclusion as a core design principle in your organization. Building workplaces for all abilities isn't a one-time effort. It's an ongoing commitment to listening, learning, and creating systems where all employers and employees, including those with visible and non-visible disabilities, can truly thrive. As we wrap up, we have a couple of quick asks. Please take a few moments to complete our post-webinar survey, which will be included in the follow-up email. Your feedback helps us to improve and bring you meaningful conversations just like this one. Follow us on social media to stay connected, access additional resources, and learn about upcoming events and initiatives focused on workplace inclusion. Mark your calendars and register for our next webinar, which is going to be next month, Military Community Mentorship Programs, Building Bridges to Success. We'll have a meaningful conversation centered on supporting the military community through mentorship and employment. And you can register for that at careercircle.com/events. And last but not least, okay, we're incredibly excited to offer you free access, free, F-R-E-E, access to over 1,000 professional development courses, thanks to our new partnership with IBM Skills Build. This is a massive resource to help you upskill or reskill your whole team. Seriously, over 1,000 courses at a zero cost. It's a phenomenal deal. Don't miss out. Head to the link in the chat now or reference our post-event email to get started. We'll also be sharing a recording of today's webinar along with the transcript and any resources mentioned in that same follow-up email. Thank you again for being here and for being committed to building accessible, empowering, and inclusive spaces year-round. Take care, and we look forward to seeing you, and stay connected with us. Make sure that you're connecting with this amazing panel. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye, everyone.